Today we have an epic tale of crime and corruption in the land of the dead.
This is Pixelated Audio, episode 40, featuring Grim Fandango. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Pixelated Audio, the bi-weekly video game music and retro gaming podcast. I'm James, and this is Brian.
How's it going, guys? Today we're going to be talking about and playing music from Grim Fandango.
The track that brought us in was Casino Calavera, composed by Peter McConnell.
This game is something that we've talked about doing for a long time.
Yeah.
Even before the remastered version came out, and it just really fell in love with the music. It's got an excellent soundtrack. That first track, great way to start the show. Now, this isn't the intro to the game, but just sets up the tone because there's a lot of jazz and swing and big band sounds. Just an explosive track, and it really gets you tapping your foot.
Yeah, and I don't think we've really played anything so far on the show that's so jazzy. I mean, with all these great trumpets and drums, and it's just such a great sound. It's so full of character, and I think that fits so much with this game. I mean, this game is so bright and fun and just silly, but then serious. I mean, there's so much character to this game.
Yeah, it's funny that you say bright and fun because it's a very dark game. But I know what you mean. It's a very kind of, I guess the story is very uplifting in a way. And so it's cool. It's really cool. I'm glad that we finally got a chance to do it, though, because we had been talking about this soundtrack for ages, and I guess the closest we got to doing jazz on the show was the Outfoxies. And so Grim Fandango, there's a ton of different genres, caked into this episode. So you guys are gonna enjoy, I think, some of the music, especially if you're into jazz and big band. So
yeah, and it's really cool because we'll have the composer on the show in a little bit.
Yeah, no, I'm super excited to chat with him. So Grim Fandango is a dark comedy 3D adventure game that was originally released in 1998 for Windows. I think it was around Windows 98, 95 era, both developed and published by LucasArts.
And unlike a lot of games we talk about on the show, this one was recently remade in 2015 called Grim Fandango Remastered, and it was published and redeveloped by Double Fine.
And most of the stuff we're going to play today is from the original version, but we've got some stuff from the remastered version too, which was performed by the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
So let's talk about LucasArts a little bit.
Yeah, so to me, and I'm sure a lot of other people our age can relate, adventure games in the 90s meant that you're talking about a game from really one of two companies. It's either Sierra or LucasArts.
Right. LucasArts is an American video game developer and publisher founded in 1982 by George Lucas, and they were located in San Francisco. Some of their big titles are Maniac Mansion, all the Monkey Island games, Sam & Max, Indiana Jones, Day of the Tentacle, The Dig, Full Throttle, Zombies Ate My Neighbors, and of course, all the Star Wars games.
Did you ever play Indiana Jones and the Fate of Atlantis?
No.
That was probably my favorite game. And Sierra had some really good stuff too, but like Day of the Tentacle, a phenomenal game. And
I haven't played any of those. I was not a PC gamer at all, so I didn't really get into any point-and-click adventures. So.
Yeah, it was those games like would take you sometimes months to complete because there wasn't like guides and stuff really back then that I had access to. The online wasn't really, a prevalent thing. So being able to figure out these over time on your own was like, exhaust all of your options and then be able to figure it out. It was great. And a lot of these games mean a lot to me.
Well, as kids, we had much more free time on our hands.
Like,
if I only have an hour to game, I don't really want to spend 50 minutes running, searching for something and
running around. Yeah. Anyways, just a few years ago in 2012, the studio LucasArts was acquired by Disney. Well, Disney acquired the parent company Lucasfilm, so in turn acquired LucasArts as well.
Yeah, but Disney basically went and stopped all development, laying off most of the staff. And they did this really to keep LucasArts' doors open, just to retain it as a bit of a licensor.
Yeah, that's pretty sad. It was depressing. I remember reading that and hearing that everybody was kind of getting laid off. And I was like, oh, man,
well,
really? Disney?
There was a lot of good games that people were excited about that got shut down.
Yeah.
Some of them were over 50% through development. So.
Yeah. Anyways, Grim was led by the brilliant Tim Schafer, who was the creator of Full Throttle and also was the co-designer on Day of the Tentacle. And this was his last game. Grim Fandango was his last game at LucasArts before he left to start his own company called Double Fine.
Yeah, and Double Fine is another American game developer and publisher founded in 2000, with their first game being Psychonauts, which one of the reasons I played it was the main character was voiced by one of the Angry Beavers. Also, the guy that's the voice of Invader Zim. So I saw that and I was like really excited. So I didn't know Grim Fandango, so I wasn't excited about Tim Schafer. So I was like, wow, this game looks cool.
Yeah, I remembered the cartoon. And I watched, I think, a few episodes, but I'm not that familiar with it. But Psychonauts has become kind of a cult classic. Yeah. It was very strange when, I think I played on PlayStation originally.
Yeah, I think that's where I played it too.
Yeah, it was a weird one. Anyways, let's get into our first music block. We're going to play a song called Hector Steps Out, followed by The Ninth Heaven.
That was Hector Steps Out and Ninth Heaven, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
You can already see how big of a jump in genres that this soundtrack is playing. And that first track, the walking jazz bass, I just think that's so cool. I mean, this for some reason, like for me in jazz, I played when I was a kid and I was really big into it, especially around high school. There's just something about it that's just so cool. It's like so, I don't know.
Well, it's a sound that really draws up a whole sense of imagery and time period, and like this music, it has so much character to it that you can feel like the movement, like you can imagine people dancing around, and I thought this first track, Hector Steps Out, the very beginning of it just reminds me of a Chips Ahoy commercial. like that's the first thing I think of. And but I mean, it's so big. Like you can see right from that first track why the soundtrack is just so good. Like, I mean, and we're not talking about anything else, but just the sound of this game is enough to draw a ton of attention to it.
Right. The soundtrack on its own, you don't even need the game at that point, because it's just, the soundtrack is so phenomenal. I could play it for, anybody, and they, who's into jazz and big band and stuff, and they would appreciate it and love it, and they would never know if this was actually in a game. And this first track, though, that big band sound, that I love that. I think that's so cool. It just really makes me want to dance, and I don't like dancing, but it's cool. It's a really rad track. The next one on there, Ninth Heaven,
Wow, it's so beautiful. Cool. That Spanish guitar and the flutes and stuff. It's just, I mean, it's just gorgeous. And I can see this as like playing this for someone that you're like in love, like hearing this in your head, like when you meet someone, you're like, oh, I'm in love with this person. Like you hear it and it's just so beautiful and
very romantic.
Yeah. And I love there's that part where you just hear the guitar by itself for a second and you just hear a few chords and I was like, oh man, like, but you can hear that it's like a real guitar and that's just so great.
Yeah, no, I know what you mean about the Spanish guitar. Like you can hear the strum and the scraping on the strings, and I think that live aspect is just so rad, and it just makes everything feel more alive in the game, even though the game, is predominantly on the dead side.
Yeah,
it's just a really cool track, and like this combination of different genres makes you always excited to see where you're going to come up next in the story, in the plot, in different areas. They all kind of work in their own way. And
when I think one thing too that the composer might be doing is these different genres a little bit have a different feeling that each one brings. Like I thought that the Spanish guitar in the second song, it's a very beautiful song, and some of that Spanish music has got a lot of passion to it, and there's a lot of romance and winning women over and stuff like that. So I think that kind of adds to that song and makes it feel even more beautiful and more romantic than what the song by itself actually is. So.
Yeah, and there's a lot of orchestral pieces in this soundtrack, and there's again, like we just played the Hispanic folk music, and there's of course jazz, swing, and big band. There was a ton of inspiration. You can tell that a lot of it's coming from like Duke Ellington, Betty Goodman, and Max Stein, who was the composer of Casablanca. And so hearing them all kind of composed into this one soundtrack for this game is pretty rad.
Yeah, and it also just brings this game, it kind of transcends being a game because of all that, because they're pulling a lot of inspiration from things that are typically considered art and very intellectual type art. I mean, some of these movies and composers that they're pulling from they're like gods living on earth, and and the styles of music have deep roots in history of being very beautiful and very well done. So
I think we're going to confuse people if we don't get into the story, so let's move over to the story real quick.
So the storytelling and the feeling of the game borrows from the ancient Aztecs' belief in the afterlife. It puts the game in the setting of a film noir similar to Casablanca, but in the land of the dead. The story follows Manny Calavera as he attempts to save the beautiful Meche Colomar.
But that's just a really cut and dry synopsis.
Yeah, and to give a little more detail, the story takes place in the land of the dead, where recently deceased souls have to stop first before traveling to the ninth underworld, which is kind of like their final resting place or heaven.
Yeah, it's like heaven, I think. There's something about the first section of this game, the very first intro, that opening cutscene, that sets the rest of the mood. You start off and you see this guy sitting in this office, and he's with a Grim Reaper. You don't really know what's going on. It's this guy, he's kind of shoulders kind of shrugged, and he's tapping, and he's smoking a cigarette, and his name is Celso. And it comes to find out that the Grim Reaper is actually Manny. So it's hard to understand at first who the protagonist is, because you see this really dark tone and this dark vibe, and you have the Grim Reaper, and it's just this very eerie kind of ominous music playing in the background in the office, and you don't really know where the game is headed. Now, I've played this game in the past, but still reliving that scene, I was kind of like, man, they really set it up kind of well here.
Yeah, it's a very clever intro. I mean, there's a lot of ambiguity as to who the main character is, what the tone of the game is, and I thought it was just a perfect way to set up the beginning of the game.
Right. Manny is basically a Grim Reaper / travel agent for a company called the Department of Death, or the DoD for short.
Yeah, and this sounds kind of odd, but it's actually really clever. So Manny, alongside others like him, are dispatched to the recently deceased to collect their souls and bring them to the land of the dead. And once they arrive at the DoD, they receive their travel accommodations to get to their final resting place. This is where the travel agent aspect comes in. So they have a few options depending on what type of person they were in real life.
Yeah, the trip to the ninth underworld can take as long as 4 years on foot if you were a jerk. But many of the people lose faith at some point in their journey and end up taking up odd jobs here and there in different locations throughout the land of the dead. But if you were a kind and generous person, you could earn a ticket on the number 9 train, which gets you there in 4 hours.
Yeah, so back to that first scene, it starts out like you don't know that this game is going to be very humorous.
Right.
And, because you see like the guy and he's kind of like, almost seems kind of sad. And
his
then
name's Celso.
Yeah.
Celso Flores, I think.
Yeah, and then like Manny comes in and he's this huge, tall Grim Reaper, and you're like, oh man, this is kind of scary. And then he takes off his outfit and he's like, oh, I'm your travel agent. And he's like kind of buddy with this guy, and
he's on the computer and he's typing. He's like, let's look at your case here. Let's look at how you were in your past life.
Yeah,
it sets up that comedy so fast. It goes straight from this dark kind of, you don't know what's going on, kind of mysterious vibe, right into the comedy. And I think that's what makes the game shine so much.
Yeah, I mean, I think that ambiguity right in the beginning sets up it to be even funnier, because you're not expecting it to be funny. So Celso ends up getting the 4-year journey, which he's like, oh, you just missed the number 9, but we can see on the screen that he's nowhere near it.
Yeah.
And because he's being a salesman, and he's just like, oh, I got something perfect for you. And he's like, it's the Excelsior line. And you're like, wow, that sounds cool.
Yeah.
And it's a walking stick with a compass in it.
that should serve you well. And he's like, oh man. And then I remember Celso leaves and he's like, man, I think that walking stick was too good for him, man.
Yeah.
That was really awesome. And we got another track to play, right?
Yeah, it's gonna be another fun kind of a surf rock sound, so another little genre change. So the track is called Bone Wagon, and we'll be right back.
That was music from the Bone Wagon, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
We warned you, it was very surf rock.
Yeah, that's awesome. It instantly made me think of Dick Dale.
Yeah,
I love surf rock. I used to listen to it a lot. My dad was really big into surf rock, so
well, I mean,
got me
growing up in California, like this is where surf rock was.
Yeah,
so, me in Ohio, we didn't really hear of surf rock.
Yeah, what do you guys listen to out there? Country?
That's what a lot of people listen to. Yeah, my dad's very into country. I was never big into country at all as a kid.
Anyways, this track is so energetic, man. It's all over the place.
Yeah, I mean, those guitars are so great. And it's got that, like, I don't really know how to explain in terminology, like that surf rock strum that's very echoey.
It's kind of like a flang.
It's got all those, like, telltale signs of great surf rock. I really love that, like, kazoo sound. It's like, it was just kind of like...
I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, it was, like, very, like, loud. Yeah, like, loud and in your ear, and... You might think that would be kind of annoying, but it was really fun. I thought this track, like you said, has a lot of energy. Another great genre thrown into this game.
Yeah, I thought that it's funny because there are so many different kind of genres. No, we're not hearing stuff like country. We're not hearing hip hop or anything like that. But it's all older. I guess this film noir time period. These kind of films were very prevalent. It's all kind of matching that vibe. I think that's so cool. It's so awesome. Yeah,
and I think having the musical styles be from an older generation, I think that helps bring them all together, because you can imagine like we said, that Casablanca sound and then the surf rock, it's all, to us, it's all very old and kind of like 40s through 60s sounds,
right?
Which I think it really kind of helps bring them all together, because you may not imagine that like a Spanish guitar sound would go well with a surf rock. It was multiple different tracks, right, but it works out so well.
It works out really well, yeah. So to continue with the story, Manny works as a Grim Reaper / travel agent to work off his debt so that he can go on his journey into the Ninth Underworld. Anyways, he used to be the top salesman, but now that title's held by Domino Hurley. Manny seems to be getting all the horrible clients, all the people that basically aren't going to take any time off of his debt. But Domino seems to be getting all the good souls, all the people that are on the fast track.
Yeah, because they're all assigned to each person. So Manny gets his assignments and Domino gets his assignments.
Right. So tired of being in this very slow kind of slump progress, Manny decides to cheat and intercept one of Domino's clients.
Yeah, and like any good story, there's corruption, murder, and the innocent caught between. And this is where Meche comes in. So Manny intercepts the recently deceased Meche, whose file says she should definitely be getting a ticket on the number 9 train.
Right.
But when he gets her back to his office, somehow the computer says that her journey is going to be on foot.
Now, remember, Manny intercepts Meche that's actually supposed to be for Domino. Mm-hmm. And in doing so, he stumbles into this kind of corruption between the DOD boss, Don Kopel, Domino, and the boss of the criminal underworld, Hector Lemons. And they've been cheating people out of their number 9 train tickets. And so Don Kopel and Domino end up taking over Meche's case and send her on her journey by foot.
But Manny knows this isn't right, and he goes after her to help her out on this dangerous journey.
Plus, he's a little bit in love.
Yeah, and it didn't help that Hector Lemons tried having Manny killed.
Right. Anyways, let's get into our next block. We have Nuevo Marrow and Gambling Glottis.
You just heard Nuevo Marrow and Gambling Glottis, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
I feel so cool after just listening to that.
Yeah.
Just feel like, man, I'm awesome.
I don't feel like so much of a nerd, I guess.
Yeah, well, it's just, jazz and big band swing, and just it's rad. You don't have to be a fan. I think it's, maybe I'm just speaking for myself and you too, but like, I don't think you have to really be a hardcore jazz enthusiast to like this. I think it's pretty cool.
Yeah, there's just so many great sounds, and in this first track, the Nuevo Marrow, I loved how there's multiple trumpets kind of synced up together, and then later on you get this trumpet that's by itself that gets the solo, right. So you kind of feel like one of these trumpets is more important than the others, and I think it just gave this really cool feel.
It's kind of like they're fighting over the
or it's kind of like a leader, and you kind of imagine like, back in those old days they would have like the shows where there'd be like the backup singers, and then the one singer would come out and they would be like the star,
the spotlight.
So, yeah, that's kind of like that's I guess that's what I imagine.
I loved the accompaniment by the piano. I thought it was just so cool. It sounded like an old saloon at the same time, and I think it's baritone sax. It's just, man, that just gets me. That's what I played in high school. So it's like, it's either that or like contrabass clarinet or something. I'm not sure, but it just sounds so real and so like improv. It doesn't sound like it was. They definitely have a theme that they go back to, but it sounds like they're just jamming. It sounds like a bunch of. I'm sure that's how it was. I'm sure it was a bunch of live guys. Of course, there's some sequence stuff thrown in, but the whole improv thing is probably very, very real.
Another thing that I noticed about this track that I really liked was there was some real subtle bongos in there, kind of in the background. And for me, I really like bongos, and not just because of like Donkey Kong or something like that. But so one of my favorite like actual bands is, they use bongos. They're Guster, and they don't really use bongos so much anymore. But in the beginning, they didn't have drums, and I thought, oh, that's so cool. So I really love the sound that a bongo makes, and to add that into a track, I think is really cool.
Yeah, the second track on there, I loved the that raunchy muted trumpet.
Yeah,
it's so like decadent almost. It's really
well, and the term raunchy, it goes very well with Glottis. So the track is Gambling Glottis, and Glottis is a character.
We haven't talked about Glottis yet.
And he's a very complex and fun character, but so I think this song really went well for him. I think there was a delicateness to it, and I think to him there is a delicateness and precision, and then but he's also a very he's raunchy, loud,
very loudmouth.
Yeah, like
he looks like a hippopotamus / demon.
Yeah,
huge orange guy. Yeah, huge mouth.
He looks like a weird like Barney cousin or something, but just handicapped.
Right, but he accompanies you through the rest of the game.
Yeah,
and he's a really cool guy. And this track called Gambling Glottis is exactly that. This takes place in a casino, in the cat casino, the cat races, right? And they're making bets, and it's so funny. I was cracking up because he's just chugging on wine, just getting totally hammered. And there's this scene that he goes into a kitchen, and he grabs his keg, and he just starts chugging, just puts it up in his mouth. He's this big, huge guy, and so he just grabs the whole keg and just puts it up and just kills it off, in just a few seconds. And it's just crazy. He's funny. The voice for him is just phenomenal.
Yeah, he's a very very handicapped sounded guy, and he has very limited skill set, but he becomes a great character.
Yeah.
I think that this game is just the way that they've accompanied the music. They didn't make this music that sounds exactly like what he looks like, but it very much accompanies the subtleties of the characters.
Right. He is a very slow character. He is, he's brilliant in his mind, but like his mannerisms, his mannerisms and his speech, they all sound very hindered by like he can't control his body.
Yeah, he sounds drunk like 100% of the time.
Yeah, it's hilarious. Anyways, we haven't talked about Peter McConnell yet, and so let's get into him a little bit.
Yeah, Peter McConnell, he's obviously a genius.
Big time.
He's an American composer who's best known for his many, many LucasArts titles during his roughly 10-year span as an in-house composer. Some of those titles are Monkey Island 2, LeChuck's Revenge, and Escape from Monkey Island, Star Wars TIE Fighter, Full Throttle, a bunch of the Sly Cooper games starting with the second game in the franchise, and he's even confirmed as the composer for the Sly Cooper film adaptation.
See, I didn't know they were doing a movie based on it.
Yeah, I think it's actually pretty recent. I mean, I think it's actually pretty recently that he signed on to do the soundtrack.
When is that supposed to come out?
I know. I think probably next year or maybe even 2017. So I think it's CG, so it might take a little while.
I never really played any of the games, to be honest. So
me either. But hearing that Peter McConnell did the music for it
makes me interested,
and that they're making a film, it makes me kind of want to jump in. I think there's actually a Sly Cooper collection for like PS3 or Vita and stuff like that.
Right.
Anyway, he's also done Psychonauts, Plants vs. Zombies, It's About Time, and Garden Warfare, Broken Age, and Grim Fandango Remastered, which both included performances from the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra.
It's pretty cool. He's a local guy, right? San Francisco.
Yeah.
That'd be awesome to go watch him. I don't know if he's in any jazz bands or doing anything live,
but
it'd be cool to go check him out.
That'd be awesome.
Well, let's ask him in a few minutes here.
Yeah.
Anyways, the game used an audio system called iMuse, which is interactive music streaming engine. And it was used in a bunch of LucasArts games, and it was developed by Peter McConnell and Michael Land while they were at LucasArts in the early 90s. It started out as a MIDI sequencer, but basically evolved into more of like a methodology. So basically the idea behind the system is that you can make music respond to the changes in a game according to the design of the composer and visually organize those different music cues during the game's progress.
Yeah, and my understanding is that it's pretty flexible and it's actually not that complicated.
Yeah, so say you're using iMuse with a MIDI-only system for a game or a MIDI-only instruments for a game. A lot of older games did this, so it was pretty common back then. Anyways, those channels could be swapped out or added in at any current time during the sequence based on the situation, regardless of timing. So let's say you had 16 channels to work with. You could mute certain channels or add certain channels in, or like unmute certain channels based on like where you are. It's pretty clever. It's being done a lot, I think, nowadays, but I think for the time it was very revolutionary. And with digital audio or streaming audio, the composer would be able to smoothly and seamlessly kind of jump around or loop certain sections of a track. So they could essentially record the same song. So to kind of give you an example, say there's like the title theme of a game and they record that like 5 different times, the same title theme, but maybe in the next version they do they add a saxophone, and the next version they add a saxophone and drums, or in the next version they add a cowbell. Well, depending on the situation or depending on the timing, the composer could actually say, okay, they're getting to this point in the game, we're going to switch to the second recording and have that extra instrument. And then, they've left that area, we're going to go back to that first recording.
Right.
And it's seamless enough to where you don't realize that it's the same, it's different tracks essentially being played, but it feels to the player as a completely, I guess, interactive, dynamic, moving track. It's pretty awesome.
Because, I mean, if you're hearing this track change to the environment, it feels like, how did they compose this song and know that I was going to get it here? Especially for a game like Grim Fandango where you're running around and you may not be making any progress at all. So I think it's very cool to see that it did that.
Yeah, and so not only the different tracks for digital audio, they can also like loop or jump around. So, let's say they have a part that's kind of like, I guess like a jazz part that's just like the rhythm section playing over and over. They could just repeat that part in a given area and then start it back up when the player leaves. I think that's pretty awesome. For the time, it hadn't been done, and I think that system is still, even today, is very, very clever.
Yeah, we see a lot of games now that have interactive music, and it's very cool.
Right.
Another thing that's really cool is the official soundtrack was released on CD in 1998, titled Grim Fandango Original Game Soundtrack, Big Band, Bebop, and Bones, and it contained 32 tracks from the game.
See, I didn't know the soundtrack came out. I guess it was only sold by LucasArts. So when I was a kid, I never would have. I loved this soundtrack. I thought it was awesome, but I never saw it sold anywhere. Like, where do you go buy this kind of music? But I guess it was go to LucasArts, studio, and you can buy it there.
For some reason, game music was always so hard to find.
It was really hard to find. Now it's becoming more of an abundance, but back then, this is 16 years ago. It's not even that old. 17 years ago, it's not even that old.
Well, you got to think practices with printing. Now there's a lot of digital media being switched around. So things like iTunes, it's so much cheaper to put out music. It's like, we already got the music. Might as well put it out and make a few extra bucks.
Brings me to the point that the original soundtrack was partially MIDI based, and it was a victim of digital compression. Not really as robust as it could have been, but the remastered version, Peter McConnell, he brought in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra to redo a lot of the score for that very reason. I think that now, you can see a much more rich and robust soundtrack.
Yeah, and the remastered soundtrack came out right around the release of the remastered game, and I think it contained 37 tracks. You can pick it up for around $10, and it's totally worth it.
Yeah, I think it's 37. And yeah, I bought it when the game came out because I was like, oh man, this soundtrack is so good. I hadn't even replayed the game yet. I hadn't played the remastered version yet, and was like, oh man, this is awesome. It's out, and it contained more than the original soundtrack had too, so it's pretty cool.
I mean, we're music junkies, so it's not hard to believe that we got a chance to play the music before we played the game again. So.
Right. We actually have a track from the original, and then we have a remastered track to play. So the first one is Ashtray Room. This is a really cool track. And then we have Blue Casket Bop, and that's from the remastered version. This is by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
That was Ashtray Room and Blue Casket Bop, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
Ashtray Room, that's not on the original soundtrack, but it's just such a rad track. It's kind of this dark tango, but funny, kind of goofy.
I thought that it has a very playful feel to the whole thing, and I feel like it's almost like 3 different songs that are playing all together, and then there's the part where they all kind of like ramp up and get higher, and then it loops, but for some reason that second loop feels more like they're in sync together. Like it doesn't feel so unnatural to have the 3 songs, the 3 parts playing.
Yeah, no, I totally see. I think that's a contra bass clarinet. It's so rad. It's so deep. Oh, just like vibrates your whole body just hearing it. It's really cool. And this track, there's something about it too that just I think this is a scene where, I mean, Ashtray Room, I'm assuming it's the scene where you're with, you're talking to Meche and you guys are both smoking a cigarette, and it's just this really weird kind of, I guess, sexual tension between the characters. And so I think the music kind of hits that very, very well.
So, yeah. Almost like, Manny's there to save her, but maybe she doesn't need saving. And but so there's like this, like this weird tension between the two as what each other's role is. And then also, does she care about him back, or does he care about her? And so I think there's like
an unspoken thing.
There's like there's oddness, but it is like a good oddness. And I mean, and there is like some sexual innuendos kind of going on that it's very bizarre to see
it's
put onto these characters and stuff.
It's so funny. There's a part where she takes off her stockings.
That's what I was referring to.
She slides it off because she gets some ash, like cigarette ash on her leg. She's sliding. There's this scene where it's like under the chair and you can see her sliding off her stocking.
Yeah, and you see Manny in the background like,
it's like, whoa. But if you look at it, it's just a bone.
She takes it off.
A skeleton,
but it's like a very sexy, and they even play like a little sexy riff, and you feel like, oh, I should be attracted to this, but then it's like, this is a skeleton. This is like a bone.
I thought it was pretty hot.
Yeah.
Anyways, the second track, Blue Casket Bop, this was a really cool scene as well. This takes place in the kind of the Beatnik nightclub.
Yeah, it's very weird, kind of like very unorganized, which kind of lends itself to that, the Beatnik kind of feel. That bass, like I don't know how you refer to that word.
Just the walking bass.
Yeah. That to walking me reminds me of that, like, hip cat daddy-o vibe. Like that you would associate. You hear sounds like that and you automatically want to start saying things like that.
Yeah, it's a very organic track though. It takes there's a lot of like improv and imperfections and when I say imperfections, I don't mean like there's anything played incorrectly. I just mean like it's out of sequence. It doesn't sound like there's any time signature. It just sounds like they're just playing as they go, and they don't really care for song timing or anything. It just it's everything is just like play as it goes. Just see how the instruments line up together and just go with it. And
you would think that would be like a flaw, but I could see that being incredibly hard to compose a song that this is how you want it to sound, and very out of key and off tone and like out of pace and all that stuff. But then to have like a whole bunch of people to communicate that to them and have them play that. But then there's very specific moments in the song where everyone is hitting their mark all together.
Oh yeah, it's just weird though. I couldn't imagine seeing this like written out. Like to think that the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra remastered this, like how is this even scored?
Yeah,
it just seems so organic that it would be really hard to actually write it out.
Yeah, very organized chaos.
This is another cool scene though. Manny, he's in this nightclub, this Beatniks, and they're all kind of against him, and there's this woman he meets there, and I forget what her name is.
Yeah, she becomes a big character in the game, and I think this takes place in like year 2 or
year 2, I think. And so you're talking to her, and she you can ask her, you can say, hey, like can you read a poem, and she'll go up on stage and she'll read a poem, and all the Beatniks sitting around the tables will kind of do the finger snapping, like good job. And Manny, you can actually go up on the stage yourself and
say,
I
didn't know this.
Yeah, and you can say a little poem, and it's kind of like pre-made dialogue, but you can choose how it goes, and it's ridiculous, like the kind of stuff that they say. But anyways, when you end your poem, everybody like is like hissing at you and like this is horrible, and then you talk to the girl. And she goes up on stage and she recites your exact same poem word for word. It's ridiculous. It doesn't even make any sense. But all the people in the audience are just like clapping. They're like, that was good. And he's just like, what the heck? You just said the exact same thing. She's like, yeah, I know, but I have a little class to it. So it was a funny scene. I like that.
Yeah, no, it was a very interesting interaction between that character and Manny, because they definitely feel like they've known each other for a long time.
Right. And we also played this game recently together. Well, not together. We played separately, but we played it for, kind of research for the episode. We actually made it all the way through, both of us. So it was really cool. I played on the Vita just because, I had a Vita laying around to do it. And
I currently don't own a Vita, so I played it on the PlayStation TV, which I actually really love.
Yeah. The remastered version, though, was, like we said, recently came out, and I think it's on PSN for $10, $15, something like that.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but it's totally worth it.
You can also find it on Steam and I think Humble Bundle, Good Old Games, maybe.
Yeah, pretty much everywhere but Nintendo.
Yeah, it's too bad because it would have worked really well with the gamepad.
Yeah, it would have been great on the Wii U. Anyway, we have another track from the remastered version called Lost Souls Alliance.
That was Lost Souls Alliance from the remastered version of Grim Fandango.
I love this track that it's so different than what we've kind of played so far.
Yeah.
It's got this laid back, almost Western feel to the music.
Right.
And one of my favorite things about the whole track is like those flutes. They're so soft, but not as in soft like they're just like they're turned down. It's just like there's almost so little air put into it that it barely can make a noise. I thought it was so subtle and fragile feeling that I thought it just drew my attention right to it.
I love the lone guitar sound. Mm-hmm. It's kind of, it does give you that lonely vibe. It's like just plays one note like the boom, boom.
And I think that gives me a little bit of that Western, like that Wild West feel to it.
Yeah.
Even though you're getting a little bit more of like that Spanish guitar.
Yeah. No, it's a clever track, and I love it. It's one of the longer tracks, and it's only 2 minutes. You know, because there's so much dynamic movement in the game and the tracks that you don't need to have overly long ones, because you can do some very creative stuff with them. And this track, though, it's just, I don't know, it just kind of spoke to me. Like, I don't know. I just like this.
It kind of makes you feel like nostalgic, or like you kind of miss home or something like that. Like you feel like you're longing for something.
Right. Anyways, let's talk about the main characters and kind of dive into their personas a little bit more, because really the cast and the voice acting is phenomenal for this game, and it adds so much extra life and character.
Yeah, and LucasArts actually went and they wanted to really go for that authentic sound, so they actually hired a lot of Latino actors to get like the slang and the dialogue and just that accent right.
Right. There's a lot of Spanish narrative too, like in the game, that, you know, they'll kind of mumble stuff to themselves or to other people. It adds a lot of character because it does have that kind of Aztec Day of the Dead the whole way through the game. Yeah. With, you know, at the same time pulling off the noir, the classic film noir, and having these voice actors play this role of, I guess, the whole Casablanca thing just sounds so well put together. The dialogue flows very well between the characters. It doesn't sound like it's chopped up. It just sounds very fluent and natural.
Yeah, and I think even with it being a humorous game, that could come across as very kind of cheap and cheesy, and especially if they had someone kind of faking an accent, whereas this game, it just comes across as so good, like so well written. It seems effortless. It seems very natural, and I think that really helped sell this game as something that would really dive its way into your heart and be kept there forever.
So there's something important about this too, is because there's a lot of games that like add humor into, you know, they try to put a lot of humor, and it's aimed, I think it's geared towards more of the younger generation, the younger crowd, maybe, you know, junior high school students now. And for us, it seems a little bit dorky, a little cheesy, you know, a little childish. But the comedy in this game and the way it's presented is very, very adult comedy. And it's, I think for us, for our age, going back and playing it again now, still all these jokes and all of this dialogue and humor, they still resonate. They still hit home. They still feel good. And the comedy, I think we can really relate to.
Yeah. Well, I don't think it's necessarily adult, because it's not like overly sexual or violent. But it's, I think you mean it's like, it's kind of stood the test of time, that it's very, it's not like fart jokes and stuff like that. I mean, so like now it's still a joke that it's kind of funny. So.
Yeah, and there's hilarious parts in this game.
Yeah, so obviously we have Manny Calavera, which I always thought was funny that Calavera is actually Spanish for skull. So I thought that was actually pretty cool. But anyway, he's voiced by Tony Plana. You may not know him by name, but if you've ever seen the TV show Ugly Betty on ABC, he plays Betty's father.
Yeah, I've never watched that show, but I guess he's...
I didn't watch that show either. I recognize his face.
Oh, okay.
Anyway, so he got his start in voice acting doing a movie called Godzilla 1985, The Legend is Reborn, and he played Goro Maki. So
he played a Japanese guy?
Yeah, I guess. So it's good that he made it past that credit. But I mean, he's a phenomenal actor. He did a great job as Manny.
Right, and I think he even has like a Latino Performing Arts Center in LA.
Yeah, I mean, he has a ton of other credits. That was just one of the big ones that I think that somebody might know. But I mean, he's been in a whole bunch of stuff, TV and movies. And he's won a bunch of awards.
I wish we could have had him do our intro.
That would have been awesome.
That would have been awesome. Anyways, Meche Colomar, she's voiced by Maria Canals. And Maria is an award-winning actress that does film and TV. And her game credits, in addition to Grim, include She-Hulk in Marvel vs. Capcom 3 and Infinity Crisis as Hawk Girl.
Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
Yeah, she's you don't get a lot of dialogue with her. Yeah, because you're only seeing her a very few scenes in the game, but Yeah, I mean, still good voice actor, and it sounds like a really good connection between both Manny and her character.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's well done.
So next up, we have Glottis, which we mentioned before.
Yeah.
He's voiced by Alan Blumenfeld, and he's another one you don't know by name, but if you've ever seen the MTV fake boy band movie, I don't know if you ever remember that, Together.
I know of it. I never saw it, but I know. It's like where they create that boy band.
Yeah, it's like a comedy, like spoof on creating boy bands, which actually turned into be a real boy band later on.
We should start a boy band.
Yeah, I don't know if we'll get very far.
Yeah.
But so he plays the manager in that movie, which I thought was really funny because I thought that movie was hilarious. But I didn't recognize him as Glottis when I was playing the game because Glottis is so like inebriated sounding and just so over the top.
Yeah.
And I just thought it was so funny to see that it was that guy.
Yeah. The main villain in the game, Hector Lamont, is voiced by Jim Ward, and massive Game Boys list. He's done Transformer series, Resident Evil, Ratchet & Clank, Metal Gear, Escape from Monkey Island, and that's just a few stuff. I mean, he's worked on numerous titles, and you would definitely recognize his voice, but we're not going to play any clips from it. You're going to have to experience it in the game itself. Anyways, let's get into our next track. This is called Compañeros, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
1, 2, 3, 4.
You just heard Compañeros, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
It's not a lot of times in games I can say mariachi totally fits and sounds amazing. I love mariachi. I mean, I grew up in California. That's everywhere. But it just fits so well with this game, and it's so cool. And this is a point in the game where you go to the Day of the Dead festival, and you can see see like guys tying balloons and stuff like that. And it's a whole kind of scene in this game. But this music plays, and I think it's so rad, so very cool.
Yeah. I mean, for me, growing up in Ohio, I wasn't exposed to the culture like you guys did in California, but I took Spanish in high school, so I got to understand what the Day of the Dead and all that was. So when I saw this game, I never played it growing up, but when I saw it, I was very intrigued. I was like, wow, that feels very, very unique. So that feel of the mariachi was just so cool to me as a kid, and because I kind of got a feel for what that was, and the music is just so great.
It's really well done.
Yeah,
it's a live band as well.
Yeah, I mean it's a very lively track too. Yeah. I mean it's very energetic for how short it was.
There's something about mariachi too that's very powerful and just strong authority that I've always kind of loved. I've always kind of been intrigued about. I don't listen to a lot of mariachi on my own, but I mean, when I hear it, I'm always like, oh man, that's so like gusto, man. That's really cool. They must be getting all the ladies. Anyway, so we've kind of touched on the graphics for the game, but let's kind of get into them a little bit more because this game has a very unique style. We've said it numerous times, but it really has so many cinematic aspects to it that makes it just a lovely experience all the way through.
Like we said, it's not been done before, so I think it really gave it a leg up visually, standing out from the crowd.
Right.
To me, it reminds me a little bit of like how Tim Burton or someone might do something where it's kind of dark, but then at the same time, it's very colorful and very vibrant.
Right.
And these wonderful personalities that are just so unique from one another. And I think the look of the environments, the buildings and the architecture and then the environments, it's just really cool. There's so much design put in there that really adds character to the game in that way.
Right. And a lot of the actual architecture of some of these buildings were influenced by stuff and structures in San Francisco. So they went to, different theaters, and they were able to kind of see the design and the different architecture there and incorporate that into the game. And I think if you play the remastered version, you can hear them talk about this aspect because it has a full commentary of Tim Schafer, and I think Peter's in there as well. And there's a bunch of different people that were involved in making the game, and they talk about these influences. And that's, I mean, you look at the imagery in this game, it's very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, that was a great feature in the remastered. I mean, it's the next best thing to sitting down and talking with them and hearing their thoughts and you know, why they chose this look, or why they made this character this way, or, you know, even down to why they chose this camera angle or something like that. I think it really adds to the level of complexity and thought put into every scene.
Right. And now everybody is very animated in this game, but it's really interesting because when you have to go in the first part of the game, you have to go to intercept. They say, hey, you know, there's been this poisoning, and you have to go pick up your client. So Manny heads over there, and this is the real world. This is no longer the game's world.
Yeah, they're in the land of the living.
Land of the living. But there's something really interesting about the artwork in when you're there.
It's like the creepiest thing in the game. Like the land of, and they even say, oh, like the living still creep me out. And they take and they do like really bizarre angles, like things they don't even look three-dimensional.
Picasso, but like magazine clippings.
Yeah, like
and everybody's
different mouth and two different eyes, and they're seem like overly happy, and it's like
it's so weird. I was like, what is going on here?
Yeah, it's the only time you see it, and it's very jarring.
Yeah, but then when you return back, everything is back to what you know, and
so you feel out of place in the land of the living, which is really funny.
Yeah, it's pretty cool though, because they do a lot of different things that we wouldn't associate with our own living world, you know, like, so when people die in this game, what happens? They actually sprout into flowers, and they call it sprouting.
Yeah, when you die in the land of the dead.
Yeah, when you die in the land of the dead, you sprout, and that you turn into flowers. So it's really this weird contrast, because usually when we see flowers, we think of like happiness and things, you know, pretty things. And in this game, it kind of reverses all these ways of thinking and the ways we were kind of taught to think. You know, in this game, flowers are the sign of dying, the sign of death. So when people die, they sprout into flowers. Like a morgue is full of flowers.
Yeah, so they're really more of a florist.
Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
Than a mortician. And so it is very weird. And it's almost like because you get shot with a bullet and then you start sprouting flowers, and it's like the flowers are something living. So it's like that's what kills something that's dead, is something that's living,
right?
Which is very unique. But I mean, it's beautiful. There's in a lot of the Day of the Dead type stuff, there's a lot of flower imagery.
Yeah, like there's this part where you're out in this open field, and it's this field of flowers.
Yeah, as far as the eye can see.
And after being kind of introduced and playing this game for, you know, the hours that I was, it already kind of changed my mind to think like, oh my God, this is a horrible place. You know, like this is a place I don't want to be. I'm in a huge meadow. There's got to be something wrong here.
Yeah, it shows how well, not only visually this game works, but how well it's written to make you feel more at home in the land of the dead than in the land of the living. So like you said, flowers are nice and pretty, but they very subtly and over time made you feel uncomfortable to see all those things.
Right.
And not in like in a perverse way or anything, but you just kind of know that this is something not good to them.
Yeah.
You know, so it was very clever how smooth all that transition was into thinking of things backwards.
Yeah, there's so many scenes taken straight out of Casablanca. Even Manny is wearing, you know, in
the white
year
suit.
2, he's wearing the white suit, and I'm like, oh my God, that's like such a Bogart theme right there. It's so cool.
Like the lone guy smoking a cigarette, thinking about the girl that got away. And
they smoke a lot in this game.
Yeah. Well, they're dead, so they don't got to worry about it.
Anyways, this is the first game that used for LucasArts that used 3D graphics with overlaid pre-rendered backgrounds.
Yeah. So that gave you those camera angles that you were talking about that once again made it feel very cinematic, because you couldn't control the camera because the backgrounds aren't actually three-dimensional.
Right. It kind of made it difficult to control in a sense.
A little bit.
But at the same time, it worked well because you didn't know where you could go, and you had to kind of figure out, you know, based on the camera angle, oh, could I try this? You know, you're kind of hidden from other areas, so it kind of gave you a creepy feel as well.
Yeah, because hidden within those 3D pre-rendered backgrounds, there are actually things you can interact with, and they don't quite look like you. And so for someone that may not quite understand what a pre-rendered background looks like, you could kind of think of like early PS1 titles, things like, you know, Resident Evil or even Final Fantasy, where like the characters are kind of ugly and like not very many polygons, but then the backgrounds are just gorgeous detail and shadows and you know, wear and tear. And sometimes you could have trouble. Like I remember in Final Fantasy VII, I had a lot of trouble finding a few things just because of the pre-rendered backgrounds.
Right. I know what you mean. Mm-hmm. And the way that the engine works, it just seems very seamless. Like you're actually in this 3D environment. It's it's really cool.
Yeah, they did a great job. I mean, and they had so many of these pre-rendered backgrounds. They had over 90 pre-rendered sets, and then they had over 50 characters that you interacted with in this game.
Right. And it's one interesting thing about the commentary is when you turn it on, there's a part where they mention the different characters, and they also said something about pigeons. Mm-hmm. And the pigeons in this game, they're like these just skeleton pigeons. Mm-hmm. They were like, we wanted to add so many more pigeons in this scene, but they took up so many polygons, we just couldn't afford the CPU power to get them on there. But I thought that was interesting. They're like, the pigeons had the most polygon count out of any other character.
Yeah, I mean, they were so small, so you would imagine you'd have to get their shape, you'd have to have very tight turns. But, I mean, just to give you an example, Manny only had 250 polygons, which, I mean, doesn't sound like a lot, and it sounds like, he's probably going to stand out really bad against these 3D pre-rendered backgrounds. But because of the stylization of the game, he actually feels fully realized. He doesn't feel like a watered down or like really low poly version of himself. He feels like this is how they intended him to look from the beginning.
Yeah, and even the graphics were kind of revolutionary for the time too, because it's not like graphics there was amazing graphics at the time. There was other things that could do it, but the system requirements were very low for this game. They wanted it to reach a large crowd. Mm-hmm. And so they targeted it like really early in Pentium chips and stuff like that. But the way they were able to achieve some of the stuff in the game was by using an engine. Now, a lot of the LucasArts titles used the Scum engine, and that was based on like Maniac Mansion. They used it, Day of the Tentacle, pretty much all the games that we were mentioning earlier, like Indiana Jones and stuff like that. They kind of scrapped the Scum engine, or took some of the best parts of it, and they created a new engine called the Grime engine. And the Grime engine was basically that. It was still kind of used the point and click interface, but it was able to handle 3D. And Grime is only used in 2 games before they retired it. I think there was this game and Escape from Monkey Island only. Grime, it's a basic engine. It just uses Lua as the programming language. It's basically a scripting language for embedded systems. You can do a lot with it, and I think it allowed them to create stuff more rapidly. And so it's pretty cool. And it adds a lot to how the game's played. And so it's really important.
Yeah, and I thought one thing that was really cool about the Grime engine also was that it allowed them to kind of break away a little bit from the point and click of the previous games and allowed them to use something more like a keyboard or a gamepad. Right. It actually gave Grim a slightly different feel than some of the other point and click adventure games.
See, when I originally played this, I think I played with just a keyboard and mouse. I think that's all I had because it was for Windows, and I think I had a gamepad, but it was like really weird. You had to like connect it through the Sound Blaster. Yeah. It was just inconvenient. And a lot of these, point and click adventures, it just made more sense, I think, because you're only really just interacting with a mouse. That's really all the interaction you need. In fact, I was even thinking on the Vita, it is kind of nice because if you don't want to play with the joystick, you can actually touch the screen and move them around that way, which is, I ended up using the joystick more often than not just because my hand placement, because I have big hands. But, it works. You can do it either play style.
Yeah, I just thought it was a really interesting feature that gave it so that this game was remade very well.
Yeah, so the remastered version, difference in graphics, what were your thoughts?
I didn't really see a whole lot. I saw that...
My thoughts exactly.
Yeah, I saw that there was a lot more what seemed like lighting. There was a lot more
like
cast shadows and stuff. I know there were some people that complained a little bit that now that the characters looked better because of the lighting and stuff, that the backgrounds could have been redone and upgraded a little bit.
I can see that.
I mean, for me, it wasn't a hindrance.
I could have left the updated graphics off and played it totally fine. You don't even need them at all.
It was a beautiful game from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. And I think it still holds up. I mean, it's the storytelling that's the experience, and the puzzles. You can be scratching your head for, forever on a certain thing that all of a sudden will come to you and seem so obvious. But, I think that original graphics would have held their weight perfectly fine today. Anyways, we're going on a little long, so let's move over to our next block. We have Rubacava and Blue Hector.
You just heard Rubacava and Blue Hector, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
I feel like we should have a cocktail in our hands right now.
Yeah.
Be wearing berets. That was so cool, though.
Yeah.
I love those tracks.
No, I got from the first one, Rubacava, I got a very sneaky, kind of sleazy, dark alley feel from that track.
It's like I think it's a tenor and a bassoon, I'm guessing, like kind of battling back and forth over the solo there. It's cool.
I mean, it really brings us back to that noir feel, that kind of, detective.
In the shadows, gumshoe kind of thing. That was rad. Yeah, the next track, Blue Hector, he's an interesting fellow. Mm-hmm. But no, the track is really cool too. It's got that kind of bluesy jazz. I keep feeling like I should be in a nightclub listening to this. It's really cool. It sounds like really good background. There's no way this was sequenced. This is definitely live. I mean, that solo, I guarantee that's ad-libbed. It's just, it's done so well and so randomly that, it just sounds good.
Yeah, I mean, this one, once again, reminds me of that, like, detective, maybe sitting alone in his office, drinking, thinking about some dame or something like that. So
smoking a pack of cigarettes at a time.
But it has that very, like, neon, like, it really is like oozing with like that feel of the Casablanca, like detective, all that. I was actually confused when I assumed, just from seeing scenes from the game before I played, that he was going to be like some type of detective. But then I find out he's like a travel agent. And I was a little bit confused. But
I think that's kind of the point too. Mm-hmm. It kind of gives you all these different, it alludes you to all these different thoughts, and, and it shows you you're wrong.
Well, and he kind of becomes a private detective.
Yeah, but that's true.
His client is himself, and he's searching for someone that he wants. So
we got another track to play. It's not from the soundtrack, and this is such a rad track. It's so mellow, and I think you guys are going to really like it. It's called Salvador's Head, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
That was Salvador's Head, composed by Peter McConnell for Grim Fandango.
I love that track. Absolutely love that track. The first part really reminds me, the first thing I thought was Borderlands 2, Firestone. I think it's Firestone, right?
I'm not sure. It's been so long since we've played that game together that I can't quite remember.
It has that kind of Wild West thing, and it builds up. It's very, I don't know, just kind of speaks to me. Very classic, kind of somber, sad.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that it really got to me was I noticed that it had a very solid theme from a previous track that we played, which was that Ninth Heaven, which that was a track that I really loved. And I could see how, like, it was very subtle. That it felt like you were about to get to the flute parts and stuff, but then the song just kind of ends, almost like it didn't have enough strength to get there.
Yeah.
Which I thought was very cool.
Yeah, this is a scene where I think it's, without giving any spoilers away, I think it's kind of an emotional scene towards the end of the game, and reintroducing that Ninth Heaven track is pretty cool because it's kind of like a theme you're familiar with, and those classical guitar just kind of strumming. It sounds like they're sitting on a rock out in the desert, playing in the moonlight. It's a really cool track.
Yeah.
Short.
This would be a very awesome ringtone, I think.
Oh, yeah.
Very mellow. And
if it were an alarm clock, I'd probably never wake up.
Yeah.
But anyways, how'd you like the game? I mean, we've been gushing about this game and talking about the music, and we love like every track.
It would have been something I would have loved back then, and I love this game so much now. Like, not only just the graphics or the story, like the characters, everything
really
together,
bond.
The music, it's such a great story.
It's a great package.
It's so creative, and it's so clever and smart and funny all at the same time.
It's almost like an interactive movie. And when I completed it, the remastered version, I was actually a little bit sad.
Me
I was
too.
like, man, like it's over. It's kind of like I lost something. Like it's over. I was really happy to complete it, but I was at the same time like, man, like that was just a great experience.
Yeah. No, I'm very happy to have the completed remastered version on my list of games that I've beaten, but there was a very big sadness to it, but then I was very happy at the end too. So
I think across the board, a lot of critics praise the game for its artistic design and its overall game direction, but it's listed as one of the greatest video games of all time. And even though this game was kind of like a commercial failure, I don't think it sold very well.
Yeah, it was considered profitable, but not a lot.
It actually forced LucasArts to cancel all plans for future action adventure games of the kind. So this kind of led to a decline of the point and click adventure.
Yeah, I mean, really, Grim was something that was meant to kind of recharge this adventure game genre, and since it just didn't do well, it kind of put the nail in the coffin, I guess, to really kind of end this. And we didn't really see a resurgence of adventure games until recently with games like Broken Age from Double Fine. Which, and
that's free on PSN right now.
It is actually free right now, so definitely go grab that.
Yeah, if you're listening to this after the fact. Sorry.
Well, for PlayStation Plus. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But I mean, also other games like the Telltale, Walking Dead, or The Wolf Among Us, stuff like that. I mean, really, we're starting to see a little bit of these adventure games come back, which is great to see. Yeah,
GameSpot has Grim located on the top of its 10 best PC game soundtracks of all time.
Yeah, I believe that.
Yeah, and it was inducted into Computer Gaming's World Hall of Fame in 2001. And it's also included in Time Magazine's top 100 games of all time.
Yeah. So, I mean, we're dealing with a very loved game here.
It's a cult classic for sure. Like, the people that play this game love it. Absolutely love the game. And, I can see how it could put off a bunch of people too. Like, newer gamers and stuff might be put off. It might not reach to them because it does require a lot of problem solving and things that might take a long time. And the game's pace could be very, very slow if you don't figure it out.
Yeah.
And there's certain scenes that are just so well done, but could take, hours to get to them.
Yeah. And I think this really became apparent in the remastered version because they did a very, very faithful remastering of the game. So it's almost identical other than some of the graphical changes and stuff like that. And what it did was it made it very clear that games have progressed in the last 18 years or so.
Can you explain that?
Yeah, there's just like different ways that they would do different things. It just made some of the puzzles feel very hard to complete because we have a different mindset of how games work.
That's true.
So I think some people were a little off-put by that. I think new gamers might not get into it as much
because they didn't grow up with those titles originally, you know, and so to kind of put an adventure like this point and click adventure where it requires so much abstract puzzle solving, yeah, I could see that definitely throwing some off.
Yeah, I mean, so almost like these adventure games feel like a whole new genre that's just popped up to a lot of gamers. So that getting into that mindset, because I did have a lot of trouble in the beginning of this game figuring out some of the really weird random things I needed to pick up and just take with me. I eventually got the hang of it, but it did take quite a while, and that could be very frustrating.
But that aside, it did get pretty positive reviews. People that loved this game loved it even more, you know, being able to go back and play it again. Do you know about how long this game took you to beat?
No, I didn't record. I played it over several, you know, maybe like 2 weeks.
Right. So maybe about like 10 hours.
Yeah, I would say. I mean, it could vary a great deal depending on how
you play,
how experienced you are with those. Yeah. I mean, if you miss something, I mean, when I first started playing, I missed something very simple, and I sat there for like 45 minutes trying to figure it out, and I was like, oh, right there it is. Like,
so obvious.
Something super simple I didn't know I could do.
But I think that's how some of the puzzles are designed too.
Right.
You figure one out, and then it kind of opens your mind up to think like, maybe I can do this and this. And you wouldn't have thought that until you kind of train yourself to, you know, understand how the puzzles work.
Right. So anyways, we have another track to play. It's called High Tone Fandango.
That was High Tone Fandango, composed by Peter McConnell. And if you're tired of hearing us gush about the soundtrack for the last hour, we'd like to welcome a special guest, Peter McConnell, the man himself. Thanks for joining us for a quick chat.
Thank you very much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so we've mentioned some of your past work while you were at LucasArts and also some of your freelance work, but maybe you could give us some detail about how you got into music composition.
Well, I mean, I guess the glib answer is I got into music composition by being born. I really have always, you know, loved music as long as I could remember. And when I was very young, I actually had some health problems that prevented me from talking. And once those were corrected, I started singing right away, and that, you know, never stopped.
You started off singing? That's pretty.
I'm told I was singing before I could talk. That's a mom story.
Like a Disney movie come to life.
Maybe that's why I'm not a composer, because I didn't start out singing. I don't know. Anyways, there's a lot of live musicians and a lot of world instruments in the soundtrack. How did they come together? Like, how did you find the sound you were looking for the soundtrack?
Well, Tim Schafer gave me a certain amount of reference material in the beginning, and that included some Mexican folk music called son. It's S-O-N. Folk music. It's an indigenous sort of very rough-hewn kind of sound, and it uses a lot of like sort of homemade violins and charangos and vihuela.
Can you explain what a chidanga is?
A charango is a little mandolin that's made with an armadillo shell.
Oh, okay. Wow. That's
awesome. And I actually played one on Grim because Tim's brother, who was a great influence on him for the game, and that's a whole big story in and of itself. But his brother brought back from Mexico a charango, which it's this little folk instrument that is a beautiful sounding, very delicate kind of mandolinish sound. Around that time, there was a record that came out. I still call them records by a guy named Gustavo Santaolalla, who is he did music for the Motorcycle Diaries, and he does music for that TV show now, Hell on Wheels. He's done he's done a bunch of music for Sony for I believe The Last of Us was Gustavo.
Oh wow,
no kidding.
Anyway, I'm a big Gustavo fan, and he had this record that came out that was just all it was charango music.
Wow.
Just like oceans of charangos, and that just happened to come out right around the time that we were working on Grim. So that's really just one tiny bit of the sound, but the Mexican folk music was a big influence on the score, and also the other sort of piece that Tim gave me as influence was his collection of noir bogey movies.
Oh wow, yeah,
nice.
And so The Maltese Falcon, Treasures of Sierra Madre,
Casablanca,
those three movies I probably watched 50 times, and I actually got some of the scores from that you can get them from film archives in Hollywood.
Oh wow!
So I believe Warner was. I think I called a guy at Warner and got. So I have some like Max Steiner. He was the composer for Sierra Madre and also Casablanca.
Casablanca as well, yeah.
And so I had his like piano reductions and also copy the full score for the theme. That was a big piece, and then the other piece was really one that I brought to the table, which was my total love of 30s through 50s jazz.
Oh yes, big fans.
And so I took this class at Harvard called Afro-American Studies 133, I think was the name of it. It was Intro to Classic Jazz, and all it was great musicians coming in to talk about playing music and just having them talk. And they might bring their instrument or they might not. They might play a couple things or they might not. But it was just them talking about playing. And, and then, of course, we studied the text was kind of the Smithsonian Collection of Classic Jazz was basically the syllabus. And that jazz and especially older jazz is something that really stayed with me, even though I never really played it that much. I always listened to it. And so when Grim came around, it was kind of like, oh man, this is finally my chance to write gangster music. And in fact, I even Swanky Max's theme. I actually wrote the theme before Grim existed.
Oh, wow. Really?
I was probably like goofing off during Monkey 2 or something like that, or I'm trying to remember what might have been during Throttle.
Full Throttle. Okay.
Yeah, and I just this tune popped in my head. Like, that would be a really cool way to do a sort of a Duke Ellington, who's probably the lion's share of the influence from that era.
I was going to say it has a lot of Duke influence. It sounds to me.
Yeah, I got the score in a mellow tone too. I mean, I studied a little bit of Duke before doing Grim. Anyway, so I think it was in the middle of Full Throttle or something like that. I said, I'll bet I'll be able to use that someday, And so I wrote it down, and I still have the sketch somewhere, like just on music paper. And then, lo and behold, a year or two later, Tim was doing, this really interesting noir game with skeletons. So that was serendipitous.
Awesome. So you got to bring it in. Anyways, why don't we go ahead and play that track? This is Swanky Maximino from the remastered version of Grim Fandango.
Yeah.
You just heard Swanky Maximino from the remastered version of Grim Fandango.
That's an awesome track. I love it so much. It's got a really Prohibition sound to me. It's not that I lived during the Prohibition or anything, but it's what I imagine playing in like a gangster bar. It's got a lot of Duke influence, like I was saying earlier, and I love the plungers. Very Fat Cat.
Yeah, it gave me a really like sleazy kind of back alley feel where it was kind of classy but still dangerous, but it even had a little bit of a soft side to it, which I think really fit with Maximino actually.
Yeah, that was definitely the idea. That sort of the bowed bass and plunger vibe is an early Ellington thing, and there was a particular it's the Cotton Club era, which was essentially run by gangsters, if I remember right. Sort of the idea is you walk. The big man walks into the room and says, "Shay, this is a swell place." That was kind of the image that I had, and I was very fortunate to work with Bill Ortiz, who's the trumpet player on that tune, who he's for many years has been Santana's main guy. He still plays with Santana.
Yeah, no kidding.
I think he was, I think he was just starting that gig not too long after Grim came out. So there it shows you how long he's been with Carlos.
Wow.
And so anyway, Bill's just wonderful, and he was at the time he was playing a lot also with a band called the Red Hot Skillet Lickers, which are sort of they're a wonderful San Francisco band that did they were kind of a new swing band, and that was one of the sort of amazing things about Grim is it came out right when there was a swing revival.
So did you find a lot of local people to help record this soundtrack?
There was a particular street in San Francisco where pretty much every musician on that soundtrack either played or lived.
Wow, that's awesome.
It's called the Mission District, and this was before the .com bubble frankly ruined everything, and for live music anyway for a while. And there were so many clubs in those days where you could just walk down this street, which is kind of an artist / Latino area. Now it's been somewhat gentrified, but in those days it was a little more mixed, and some of these places are still there. I don't know if Bruno's is still there, but Bruno's, the Elbow Room, the Makeout Room. There were clubs where you could go hear rock and roll, clubs where you could have a really expensive martini and hear, Tom Waits's reed player play, who's one of the players on the Grim.
Right.
And then you could go around the corner and, get a really ridiculously strong margarita at a taqueria and listen to some Cuban music or live mariachi.
Wow.
Nice.
So it was just like literally, I think every musician except the tabla player and the cellist, who were friends of mine, either played in that district or lived there.
Wow. So like even the mariachi bands and stuff like that.
Mariachi band, I went by walking into the taqueria. I found those guys.
Oh, no kidding.
It's like, hey, I'm gonna get some tacos, and I got a job for you guys too.
There was a great band playing, and I was like, hey, can your guys read? And they're like, well, not really, but call my cousin, and he could put together a band for you that can read. And that's what happened. And yeah, they were the real deal. That the mariachi band was, they had a vihuela player and a really wonderful violinist. I love the violinist.
Oh, it sounds great in the soundtrack.
And then that the trumpet player with the big fat. The trumpet player was the leader. A big fat sound.
Oh yeah.
So it was. I mean, really, as much as possible, I tried to have anything in that score, everything, because I mean, in those days, the live music thing, it was still kind of a novelty in games. I mean, there weren't very many orchestral scores yet, very few at that point, and
right.
Live music was still pretty much a new thing.
Well, it was very narrowed down to like PC games and the few
something that could handle it.
Yeah,
right. And Grim was like, well, we're going to do something that we're going to do the livest thing that there is in the world. We're going to do jazz. It's like a statement, really. Mm-hmm. You can do real music in a game. You can do something where the real high quality, incredibly expressive musicians are expressing themselves, and it's going to come out of your PC speakers, and it's going to be, the real deal.
Yeah.
And so it was like this wonderful opportunity. Wow, we actually get to bring in real guys, and so yeah, I just found the very best folks I could find, and very fortunately, there were some incredible players, as there still are in the San Francisco scene, who were specifically like dedicated to jazz, and there was also this the flute player, the Andean flute player.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Oh, it's so good.
Yeah, he's from Peru, and he also lived in the Mission District. I can't remember. I think I was referred to him by Sean Clark, who's a game designer at LucasArts. Somehow he had run into Jorge Molina, I believe.
It's like all these little pieces just kind of fell together, and
it was. I hate to say the perfect storm phrase, but that's what it was. It was really
it's the right time and the right place and the right part of the country with the right game.
It was the completely opposite of the Dr. Hook song. Yeah.
But anyway, speaking of great opportunities, I would assume that a lot of composers' dreams would be to work with a live orchestra. So what was it like working with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra?
Well, when we first did Grim, we did not have any sort of budget, and there was no thought given to even the possibility that we could work with a live orchestra in those days. I mean, it was... we had in the back of our mind, we thought, well, maybe someday, because we got Skywalker around and everything like that, for Lucas and everything. But it was really like just another, at that time, it was just such another league of budget.
Right.
And by the way, I kind of did some things to haunt me, because there were a lot of, to get that sort of feel, like this sort of rubato feel of a live guy conducting that Grim music. I played a lot of stuff into those sequences, like without a click track.
See, I was gonna mention that. I was gonna say, iMuse, it sounded like there is a lot of sequence music in there as well. But how did you? I can't even fathom how you would have lined that stuff up with the kind of ad lib tracks from the live.
Geeky, essentially. Do you really want to give the actual technical way we were able to do that?
Well, we do go into some details. We're considered hardcore gamers.
So the way that system worked, and I wish more systems worked this way, is that it associated with each audio file a MIDI file which contained a tempo map and a bunch of other information. And so the system always understood what measure, beat, and ticket was on.
Oh, I see.
Even if the tempo was going all over the map.
That makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
So we kind of understand the iMuse system, but it's hard to kind of see how you guys did it when you were actually putting all those pieces together.
So part of the system, I don't think I'm giving any secrets of the kingdom at this point, but part of the trick of being able to, and like I said, I'd like to see more people do it this way. I think Wise might be doing this now. But anyway, is to be able to have tempo be a fluid thing and not make suppositions that you're working with, 120 BPM dance music,
right?
4/4 time.
Yeah.
Anyway, so that's how that worked, and the tempos did fluctuate. Although for a lot of the jazz stuff, they didn't fluctuate much. The tempo didn't change very much at all. Going back, it's mostly orchestral stuff that the tempo was all over the map, which came back to haunt me, because I remember when I was writing this stuff, I was like, well, I'll just do this. No one's ever going to play it, and in the back of my mind, I was that little teeny tiny faint voice that goes, "You'll be sorry." So I have to say that getting that music in shape for Melbourne to play was a real challenge, since the picture was locked and the game sort of context was locked, and you don't typically ask an orchestra to change tempos all over the place like that.
Right. They must have looked at the music and been like, "What the heck?"
But anyway, in various ways, I was able to kind of smooth things out and organize the cues so that, or split them up so that we didn't have too many too many bumps in the road that way. But, the short answer to what's it like to work with Melbourne? I'd worked with them on Broken Age, and they're just fantastic. I love working with those guys. Awesome. And that's the whole story of them working on Broken Age. Andrew Pogson, who was their assistant artistic administrator at the time, had called me from Australia, and basically, after a discussion, we had commissioned me to actually write a Grim Fandango suite for them. And we went through a whole bunch of paces on that. And in the course of that, he said, I see you're the composer from Broken Age. Do you suppose that Melbourne Symphony might be able to be involved in that?
Okay, so it was kind of like kill two birds with one stone.
Oh, it was this is another sort of serendipity thing for Grim. I mean, in this case, it was serendipitous for Broken Age, but it came back around again for Grim. And, essentially because Andrew was a fan and a backer of Broken Age and is very dedicated to increasing the exposure of his audience to music for games, and having the orchestra perform more game music. He and the music director, and I mean, there's a whole bunch of people involved in saying yes to something like that.
Right.
The musicians union, so to actually get we're talking about the Broken Age score now to happen was it was just a miracle, and that came from the dedication of a lot of people from Double Fine to MSO. And in the case of Grim, we were sort of lucky in that sense because we'd been down that road with Broken Age, and we knew, kind of what to expect. Everybody knew what to expect.
It's very fortunate.
It's still a bit of a bear because Grim is it's hard music. But it came out so wonderfully. The players were really into it, and I just owe such a debt of gratitude to Andrew and to the MSO for being part of it.
Well, the awesome work that you guys did, that's the reason why we're talking about it today, because it turned out so good.
Oh, thank you. And I was basically, the way we did the session was over Skype.
Oh, okay. Awesome.
I sat here in Fairfax, in my colleague's studio in Fairfax, and we had a Skype link to Melbourne, and that's, I could talk to the producer and the engineer, and they could talk to the conductor, and we went through it like that. And I could talk directly to the conductor as well. So, a lot of orchestral sessions are done remotely now. It's part of the way it works.
Time has changed since Grim was first created.
I mean, if you had told me so many, if you had told me, I'd be
laughing at me.
Yeah, in Grim was written before anybody had invented an MP3, and when a website was a novelty that you went to look and see how much you should be paying for your SUV.
Yeah, I think I was downloading MIDI files to just listen to fake versions of music back then before MP3s came out.
And my family didn't even have a computer yet.
Anyways, so today we covered Grim Fandango, composed by Mr. Peter McConnell.
And like always, if you want to know more about our show, you can check us out online at pixelatedaudio.com for show notes and track lists. We can also be found on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Pixelated Audio.
And feel free to leave comments or suggestions for future shows. We always appreciate them.
Yeah, and we'd like to real briefly mention our Extra Life charity event, which is going to be coming up in a couple days. And we're also going to be doing a short episode during the event that we'll have out shortly after.
Right. So we're going to close out the show here with a track called Manny Meche. It's a very passionate track, almost bittersweet. Could you tell us a little bit about this track?
That one was the big love theme, and the funny thing about that is that it never got an opportunity to play in its entirety. It only plays in little snippets throughout the whole score.
Mm-hmm, right.
So the actual final tango never plays until the credits.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Which is fine. It's kind of like the credits are sort of, they're kind of the last word on the score.
Right.
And you get to hear the whole version of this thing that's basically been you've heard little bits and phrases of it. it kind of makes sense in a way because, Manny and Meche don't really get to be together until the end.
Mm-hmm.
And the track itself was a little nerve-wracking for me because I'm the violinist. And
wow. I think this is the most beautiful violin. I love it.
Oh, thank you. I had to practice it, let's put it that way. And it was great to be able to play it live. That was recorded live. I think it was like 2 takes or something like that.
Wow.
We saved 2 takes or whatever with me just playing live with the cello player, Hans Christian, who's amazing. He's a new age musician. And he plays cello on Grim and also sarangi, which is a sort of an Indian traditional classic cello-ish instrument. So yes, Manny Meche's very special tune for me. It's one of my favorite themes that I've done, and it took a lot of sweat to actually make it happen. It was really cool. Like this summer, we got to play Grim at Red Rocks with Video Games Live and Tommy.
Oh, wow.
That's awesome.
Colorado Symphony, and I did a longer suite with the symphony, where my colleague Clint Pajakian, who played the that thing that sounds like a accordion, is actually a melodica. One of those things. Okay,
I was like, man, something sounds
weird.
It's
a little different. It's a little jankier sounding, a little sort of cruder sounding, and that was Clint playing. Wonderfully just to the chord chart. We tracked that after we tracked the violin and the cello track, and he played that theme on solo classical guitar at that show at Red Rocks. So that was like a really great experience for both of us to kind of revisit that theme and do it in front of a bunch of people at one of the coolest venues in the world.
Sounds like a blast.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It was very cool. Yeah, if you told me that we'd be doing that 10 years ago or whatever, 16 years ago, I never would have believed you either. But anyway, it was a nice opportunity, and it's a special tune for me. I get a lot of still get a lot of mail about that one.
Well, I'll email you again about it.
Right on.
Well, if people want to hear your music outside of games, is there a place that would be good for them to go find it, or a place that you could see if there are any live shows like this going on?
Most of the stuff that I have done really is in a game or on a game soundtrack. There are, iTunes. I've got the Sly Cooper soundtrack is on iTunes. The Grim Fandango soundtrack's on iTunes. The Psychonauts soundtrack's on iTunes. I guess I should know all my soundtracks. Those are the 3 that pop into my head. At the moment, I know I'm missing something, and Brutal Legend is probably up there.
Oh, right, the Jack Black one, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's on vinyl too. Yeah. If you can get a hold of the vinyl through Double Fine, that's pretty styling.
That's awesome.
Well, Mr. McConnell, we really appreciate you chatting with us for a little bit, and we're looking forward to hearing more of your future compositions.
Thank you. It's my great pleasure.
Again, the track taking us out is called Manny and Meche for Grim Fandango.